Would George Orwell's famous work, 1984, have anything to tell us about potential oncoming socialism in the United States? Asking for a friend. So, first thing to keep in mind is I'm going to be using a lot of generalizations because the concepts in this are very complicated. This could easily be an 8-hour series. If there is a topic you find interesting that I don't really go into detail on, you can ask about it in the comments below. I might answer you there. I might make another video expanding upon the point. So first, let's understand a little bit about George Orwell. George Orwell would have described himself as a democratic socialist. Throughout his life, he had a fairly colorful jaunt around the world, getting involved in many things. Probably the most impactful to him was becoming involved in the Spanish Civil War. He volunteered to go over and help the Republican side win the war. They didn't. But one of the things he found out while he was over there was the horrific infighting that was going on. The Republican side of the Spanish Civil War was made up of people who factions that backed the constitutional Republican government, all the way through socialists, communists, and anarchists. And at a point where the Republican side was on the verge of victory, the communists decided to split and launch their own counter-revolution, thus costing the Civil War for the Republican side. To make matters worse, not only did the communists split from the rest of the factions, eventually the sub-factions of the communists turned on each other, each accusing each other not being sufficiently communist enough to carry the banner to victory. And this is where George Orwell found himself, was essentially in one of the communist enclaves. And when he tried to talk common sense, they said, "You're a fascist." Yes, things haven't changed much. So this had a big impact on how George Orwell would look at things. Now, one of the things that's happening during the 30s and 40s is a lot of socialists and communists around the world are turning a blind eye to things that are going on in Russia. They kind of look at, some of them don't know. The people who do know what's going on have a tendency to just kind of look at it as, yeah, bad things have to happen first, and then the good stuff comes later. Uh, George Orwell's time in the Spanish Civil War kind of opened his eyes to this, saying, it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, and it seems like communism tends to tear itself apart or get horribly dictatorial. Now, Orwell would claim to be a democratic socialist to the day of his death, but towards the end, he even questioned if democratic socialists could be trusted with that kind of power and not be corrupted by it. His eye-opening events in the Civil War led him to write Animal Farm in 1984. Oddly, one of the things, communism was held in high enough regard in England that he actually found it very difficult to find a publisher who would end up publishing Animal Farm. So we have a couple of terms we have here, so it's probably a good idea to start defining them. And again, oversimplification. So, socialism. Socialism is an idea that predates the French Revolution. Uh, there are some historical Precedents prior to that, but they're pretty nebulous and not very well documented. The ideas that spring up in France are the ideas of socializing the assets of the nation. Now, you have to put that into context and understand at that point, almost everything in France was owned by the king, the nobility, and the church. Private ownership of things was fairly minimal. So they were looking at taking things out of the government's hands and somehow making them the assets of all the people. And there's literally probably several hundred different variants of socialism, all with different ideas on how you achieve this socialization of assets. Some of them believe in the existence of money, some of them don't. Some of them believe in state ownership, some of them believe in some kind of other collective form of ownership. But the thing is, socialism has a myriad of different meanings. So we also have communism. And communism and socialism tend to get conflated. There's a reason for this because socialism is a part of communism. But all socialists don't need to be communists. Up until Marx started writing his theories, nobody really had a really good explanation of how socialism actually occurs. So Marx came up with his idea. He believed communism had four parts. First was a violent revolution, an exceptionally violent revolution, where a very large percentage of the population needed to die in order for the revolution to be successful. The second part of it would be known as the dictatorship of the proletariat. The idea was that there would be either a dictator or a council of dictators that would have absolute control because they would need such in order to start implementing the later phases of communism. The third phase of communism is what they'd call socialism in everyday life. The idea is that everything would be socialized, still under some of the dictatorial apparatus. And then ultimately, in the fourth stage, you would have what was known as true communism, where the central government would wither away, and the highest form of government would be local communes, which would be run by either committees or possibly even a democratic group of people, but it would exist on a low order. And to a certain extent, this was also considered a form of anarchy, lack of government. So we also get there's some critical item to understand about communism. Marx believed that in order for the revolution to occur, there needed to be class warfare. He believed there was conflict between the classes of people by economic class, essentially the rich, the middle class, and the poor. And his grand revolution or civil war would essentially, the classes would turn on each other. And by process of elimination, there would only be one class left when it was all done. Marx envisioned that this would be happening in heavily industrialized societies, and that a lot of the Western industrialized nations at that time were very close to communist revolution. He turned out to be wrong on that and many, many, many other things. So then, final term we want to talk about is democratic socialism. So Europe experienced a very large swath of revolutions that swept the continent in 1848. And, of course, the communists were excited, thinking this is going to be the start of the communist era. For the most part, all the revolutions failed. But what ended up happening was because The leadership of most of the countries realized that social order was getting kind of tenuous. They made a deal with socialists to basically implement some socialist ideas and give them a political platform. And this birthed the idea of social democrats. These were people who believed in the end goal of total socialism, but they believed they should only do it via democratic means, thus no violence. And if it took a long time to do it, that was okay as long as they kept going in the right direction. Uh, the communist Marxists decided they absolutely hated the Social Democrats, but quite frankly, they probably had the most success of any of the groups. So, talking about the book 1984, the book itself was actually written as kind of a parody of Russia. Now, a lot of times we use the term parody to mean it as like a funny or a mocking way of doing things, but parody can also be exaggeration. And so this was the Russian communist state on steroids. Uh, One of the things, if you go into in depth analysis and look at how the society in 1984 is structured, the society as such would probably collapse due to the law of diminishing returns. The party is so intent at such complete absolute control that every individual that they need to bring in to control in the absolute way uh, would take more and more resources to do. And you're dealing with a country that would probably be even less efficient than the Soviet Union was. But Orwell was not really a science fiction writer per se. It wasn't his goal to say, here's the dangerous future that approaches. He wanted to show the absolute worst of the Soviet system as a warning to people, saying, yes, this too can come to you. So, what are some of the things we see in the book 1984? Well, we see the idea of a single party. And we do have certain dangers of that occurring in the United States. There definitely is a push for a uniparty movement, and our system kind of leans towards a uniparty structure. Typically, we have one dominant party and then a secondary party that is in opposition but seems to be very ineffective at doing it. Show trials? Well, we may be having one coming up here in the near future, huh? The idea of control of media. The party in 1984 controls all media. Our government is striving to control social media, as we're starting to find out from the various investigations going on that, from, like, for instance, the Twitter files, that the government was specifically requesting that certain ideas be removed, certain people be throttled. Rewriting history, definitely getting a lot of that. We saw the 1619 Project was just essentially a fictitious rewrite of American history that was suddenly dropped into a lot of schools and probably still there in a lot of them. The idea of constant eavesdropping. Well, you've got media devices. They can basically tap into them at all the time. And so and to a certain extent, they may not be actively listening, but they're probably storing almost everything you do. We are starting to see the beginning of propaganda. I mean, it's always been there, but it's getting worse. One of the things in the book is the infamous part where in reality the ration of chocolate drops, but it's reported as an increase by changing the records. One of the things that probably gets lost on some of if you're watching the movie or reading the book, is it seems like everyone kind of falls for this. But the thing is you think about it, if you're that strapped for food, you're going to know exactly how much you're getting, and you're not going to actually believe that your ration went up when it actually went down. However, as the ultimate uh, goal of propaganda is to get the person to say things that they don't agree with, that they know is wrong, because it weakens your ability to resist if you're forced to say something you know is a lie. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and break this into a couple different parts. If you have any questions on what I've gone over so far, please use the comment section below. Smash the like button. If you've come across this video and you're not a subscriber, take a look at my other titles. Consider subscribing. I have an eclectic range of things I go over. And if there's someone who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Right? Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Please look forward to the additional parts to this video.